Welcome to another segment of provocative conversations destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Hello. Picking up on the same subject, please understand that I live in the South and it's necessary to have air conditioner, some cool air. Unfortunately, there are times where it runs so hard that you may hear it in the background, but please understand that I do the best I can with compressor, noise gates, and a few other things, but some sound, especially when you have very good microphones, you're going to pick up background noise if at all you hear it. I know I hear it, but it's probably because I am listening for whatever small sounds I might have in the background. Please don't let that disturb you from the content of what I'm speaking upon. The divine season of the pandemic, this divine period of time that we all now find ourselves within. There's a verse that I want to start with because I want you to know the type season this is. It is necessary for you to know the type season this is. I will begin to give you things that God spoke to me starting from March 22nd. That's where I'll start with March 22nd, 2020. I'll begin to share with you things God said to me, but there's something that I want to read. There's a verse in the Bible that seems to speak volumes. There seems to be a great principle within its content. Not saying that other verses don't have it either. It's just that in the topic that I'm speaking upon, in what I'm getting ready to go into, I want to lay this small foundation there because there are layers of truths inside of this verse. And I want to read it. I think I want to read it in the God's Word translation, the GW translation. I'm reading it out of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting at verse 1. And we know this verse, okay? Many people know this verse. Now, I won't say we all know this verse, but many people know this verse. And, well, I just want to lay this foundation because this will help us to appreciate when I speak of the divine season and when I speak of the hand of God in this season and God operating in and upon and through this season. This verse or this set of verses here will help you to gear your mind toward the greater possibility of God orchestrating the events of this season. For those who need that greater assistance or that assistance to go further into their belief in God having his hands within and throughout this design season. Chapter 3, verse 1 says it like this in the God's Word translation. It says, everything, that excludes nothing, has its own time. And there is a specific time for every activity under heaven. There is a specific time for everything, for every activity under heaven. There's a lot of activity going on in this time period that we're in right now. There's a time to be born, and there is a time to die. There is a time to plant, and there is a time to put out what was planted, or pull out what was planted. That's an important area there. Let me read that part again. There's a time to be born and there's a time to die. There's a beginning to it. You can say there's a beginning and there is an ending. Just because God begins with a particular thing doesn't mean that he's going to end with that particular thing. There's a time to plant, and then there's a time to pull out what was planted. Right now, we're in a season where a lot is being pulled out. A lot that was planted, a lot that was divinely laid down is now being divinely uprooted. There's a time to kill and there's a time to heal. There's a time to kill and there's a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and then there's a time to build up. We don't want to see God kill anything, but we want to see him heal everything. We don't want to see God tear down anything, but we want him and will only accept him as being the builder of everything, or only in the business of building up, not tearing down. There's a time to cry and then there's a time to laugh. I subscribe to you that I will show you that we are not in a period of laughter as much as we are in a period of crying. There's a time to mourn, and that's the type period we're in right now. And there's a time to dance. There's a time to scatter, and then there's a time to gather them that are scattered. There's a time to hug. And then there's a time to stop hugging. There's a time to start looking. And then there's a time to stop looking. There's a time to keep. And then there's a time to throw away. There's a time to tear apart. And then there's a time to sew together. There's a time to keep quiet. I wonder if that's what these masks are for. There's a time to keep quiet. I wonder why the church doors are closed. There's a time to keep quiet, and then there's a time to speak out. There's a time to love, but then there's a time to hate. There's a time to love, and then there's a time to hate. There's a time for war. And then there's a time for peace. I wonder if the chronology of that verse is important. Because if the chronology of that verse is important, I wonder if we've gone through a time period to love, and now we're getting ready to go through a time period to hate, or where hate will be prevalent. I wonder if the times that we are in, the season that we are in right now, because it says in verse 1, there's a time and season for everything. I wonder if we're in the seasonal time for war. Civil war. I subscribe to you that we are. If it is not civil war, it will be civil violence of the worst sort. A new type of, it will be civil unrest, civil violence, and there will be a civil uproar in relation to all that has transpired since slavery, but definitely all that has come forth during this pandemic period. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I must say that. And this is the time period to say that, because many people must prepare. Folk don't prepare. Folk are not good at preparing. Certain folk are good at preparing, and certain other folk aren't good at preparing. It's unfortunate that folk don't believe a thing until that thing is upon them. Well, that thing in this season is upon us. There's a time for war. Underline that word war. And then there's a time for peace. If the chronology of this verse is necessary, if this verse requires us to keep chronological form of war and peace, before you have peace, you have war. I wonder if we are now void of peace. This is not a period of peace, and war is inevitable. I would say to you what verses of scripture says. It says, there is no peace, says the Lord. And I'll leave it at that. You know the rest. I don't know who would be considered the other part of that verse, but there is no peace, says the Lord. And if he is the Prince of Peace and he is the one orchestrating all of this, then is he now no longer the Prince of Peace? Or is it that these are necessary disturbances to bring us into a greater state of peace? The yin and the yang are important. The positive and the negative have a relationship. I will get into all of that as we go on into this here. So that leads me into why I am at this particular point on March 22nd, 2020. This is what God said to me. And this was only 4 days, 3 or 4 days, 4 days at the least, where God just gave me an epiphany moment where I saw everything clicking together, what God was saying to me for months, for almost a year leading up into this here period. I understood it. And this was the first strong message that he gave me. March 22nd. It's this first strong message, where all the messages were strong that he gave me, but this one in particular, because I was conscious. I was now awake. I was consciously awake, and I understood the moment that I was in. I was conscious of the moment that I was in on March 22nd. Just become conscious. So this had a greater impact upon me. But this is what God said to me. What I am getting ready to speak to you about now is the type of season this is. And this recording will be regarding the type season this is, because this is a season of many types. And I think people need to understand, what type season is this that we're in? What is this? I've heard some say this, and I've heard some say that, and I've heard some say they don't know, and I just don't know. So what type season is this? Well, I'm glad you need to know, because I needed to know too, without even knowing that I needed to know. But God gave it to me before I even knew I needed to know it. And now I am sharing it with you. The type season this is what God said to me, and I will pull excerpts of the type season this is from the different days that he gave me extensive revelation regarding this pandemic season, this pandemic period. And I'll begin right here on March 22nd with excerpts from the type season this is. He said this is a rough season. Now, let me tell you something. When God calls something rough, you best believe it must be rough if God calls it rough. When God said that to me, I kind of shivered. Literally, a rough season. Oh God, what are we getting into? So you need to know that this is going to be a rough season. This is a rough season that you have entered. This is not a season that you have experienced before. This is not a season that we have experienced before. You're not going to get away with this season by saying, this is nothing more than, this is nothing more than, this is just a repeat of. No, this is not. This is not a season that you have experienced before, but it is a season that you can endure. So it is a rough season. It's going to be a rough season, but it is a season that we can endure. Now, there is another topic that I have on what we need in order to endure. You're not going to just endure just because you are a so-called child of God and they aren't. You're not going to endure just because you are a member of the body of the church and you perceive that they are not. That is not why. You're not going to have this get out of jail free card just because of. That is your religion talking. That is not necessarily God talking. That's your religion. This is a season that you can endure if you do the things that you can endure. But I will deal with those things when I get to the subject, what we must do in order to fare well, in order to endure. So this is a season that you can endure. You will endure this. This is what God was telling me. You can endure it. You will endure it. You will get through this here. Now, this is not for everybody, because everybody is not going to endure this here, and everyone is not going to get through this here. And we already see where over 200,000 within the United States alone have not gotten through this here. Never mind the 1 million people around the world who have not gotten through this here. And then those who have been infected or affected by the virus, they have not fared well through this either. They're having long-term complications that we know nothing of in regard to how long will this last within their bodies and all. But we'll get through all of that. This will be a period of instability, a period of instability, a period where things will not be stable. Contrary to what you may be hearing from multiple sources, this is not a period of stability. This is a period of instability. Even if you personally seem to have some stability in your life, that does not mean that this is a period of, that just means that even in the midst, you yourself have stability. But that does not again mean that this is not an unstable period, because this is a period of instability. This is what God stated to me. There will be instability in every region of the world. Every region of the world. Now understand, you're going to come to find out that a lot that I'm reading has already occurred. Why? Well, I told you I sat on this for at least 8 months. You're talking from February that I didn't understand it, but from the month of March where I did understand it until now, the end of September, I sat and I was just hearing from God and hearing from God and hearing from God. I was literally shut in my house for nearly 200 days before I even began to speak this here, or rather I spoke this to certain members of my family and my household. I spoke it to each of my children, even the ones who are kind of smelling themselves right now and they're a little hard of hearing. I still spoke it to all of them. Some of them feel as though they have a ticket because God speaks to me and then I speak to them, and they all know what I've spoken to come true or to be true. They've all experienced it all their lives. Maybe not my oldest son, but all of my other 6 kids. My 7th kid, which is my first child, he didn't see this all of his life, but all of his knowledgeable life, he's known me to be in God and in this, this vein of things, but he did not witness all that they witnessed. The other 6, they know what I say God said to be true, and my spouse as well. They may not respond to it as though they know, but they know, and they will admit that they know. But I gave it to them, and I gave it to a few other people, a few people outside of this house. Some I regret giving it to only because of their response or their lack thereof and their judgment of me, even without them verbally, openly judging me. I know by their response or their lack thereof, they judged me. But that's something they'll have to live with, and God will prove as to whether or not I was right and whatever, and I'll leave it at that. But anyway, every region of the world. So if you hear me say stuff that has already occurred, just look at that as confirmation to what God told me, because I'm talking back from March 22nd. Nobody knew what was really going on. I won't say nobody, but most people did not know what was going on, just like I didn't. And even when I came to understand God was talking about this time period, I still didn't understand the virus. I still didn't know anything about the virus. We had just began to see the virus in March, in the month of March. We started hearing of people in New York getting sick, or somebody in the state of, I think it was the state of Washington. The state of Washington, upstate Washington. Something about, I remember it was an elderly home or some type of hospital or something. I remember hearing of this in the month of March, but I didn't know any of this was relative to what God was saying to me. But anyway, when you hear me read this, you'll say, but that's already happened. Good. Use it as confirmation that what I'm saying is true. This will be a period of instability. There will be instability in every region of the world. You're not going to be able to run here or there for cover. This is a pandemic. And if this is a pandemic, and if this is the hand of God, the effects of this season are being felt around the entire world. Every region of the world will begin to experience instability in every area of their society. Did I know what God was saying when he was telling me every area of our society? I didn't understand systems, social systems, and all economic systems and the legal systems, not like I know them now that the pandemic has occurred, and now that the month of June was revealed to me by God. Now I understand something that was, I guess, there to be understood. I just never saw the need to understand it beyond what I knew it to be. It's just what it is or was, what it is or was. Every region of the world will begin to experience instability in every area of their society. There will be no sure stability. No sure stability. Nothing will be stable. Nothing will be sure. This is a time of great exposure. Now understand this here. We are in September now. Now you can see and maybe you can hear what I'm saying. God told me this is a period of great exposure. I will read what he says, but I'm just going to say it from within me. God said to me, everything that must be exposed will be exposed, and everything that is to be exposed will be exposed. And there's nothing that is to be exposed that will not be exposed in this season. This is a season, a time of great exposure. Let's keep reading. The truth will expose. There's a message that I have out here on my podcast, It says the truth must prevail. If you listen to that, I spoke that there on the night of the impeachment ending, and I spoke the truth must prevail. Now, if you listen to that message and then you listen to what I'm saying in this here, you'll see the correlation there, and you'll see that I was speaking forth what has now transpired in relation to the truth and the exposure and the truth prevailing, the truth exposing the lie. Here it is now. This is what God is saying to me, March 22nd. The truth will expose. The truth is going to expose. And as we all know, we are seeing the truth come forth as it relates to the president, as it relates to his life, his dealings, as it relates to the political system, the politicians, as it relates to the economic system and the systematic enslavement of the systems that exist. We see all of this coming about. We see the church being exposed, those within the church being exposed, those with the collars around their necks being exposed. We're seeing this at record numbers as we've never seen them before. Some can say, well, yeah, because we have social media. Well, I'm sure social media has something to do with it getting out there. However, this is a time period. If it wasn't because of the period of time, the period in time that God has us in, you wouldn't see this here the way that you see it. But because we're in the time period that we're in, this is why you're seeing this to this magnitude. The truth will expose. The truth is going to expose. It will expose everything that is needed to be exposed. We never saw the racial issues like we see them now. The exposure, all of these deaths that police were killing people and we knew nothing about, and it never hit the news. And for whatever reason, the media didn't cover it like I feel that they should have, or maybe they just didn't have enough information to cover it, or it just didn't seem like a story that would sustain its life cycle in the media. I don't know, but for whatever reason, these things were not known until we came into this period. And then the few cases that were known, we cared nothing about because we were all living our lives. Well, now we're in this period of great exposure. This is a season of great exposure where everything that is needed to be exposed is being exposed. Keep reading. Nothing that is supposed to be exposed will be left unexposed. Everything that is supposed to be exposed will be exposed in this season. If you have skeletons in your closet, I'm not talking about things that you may have or may not have done or whatever in your distant past or whatever, that you got right with God and you got right with people as much as you could. I know that you can't get right with everybody that you've wronged, but your heart is right. Your heart is upright. You've repented. You've changed. You've turned, and not repented in a religious sense as much as it is you turn from your doings. You've acknowledged yourself and you understood where you were or whatever. And I'm not telling you to go back into that or whatever else. I'm sure we all have those things. What I'm saying is, if you are harboring things that you know that are not right and that are wrong and are not legal or criminal in nature or just not morally correct, and you're practicing those things, you need to know that this is a season of great exposure, and you need to understand that your trickery and your deception will be exposed in this season. This is a season of hearing. This is important to me because I have heard in this season from God as I've never heard from God in any other season. Now, I've heard from God in many, many, many of my seasons, especially my rough seasons. I've truly heard from him. And I'm like, God, why do I always why do I always extensively hear you in my hurt seasons? Do I have to go through a season of hurt to hear you? I don't want to go through the hurt in order to hear you. I don't want to go through marital issues before I can hear you. God, just give it to me on a normal whatever. But anyway, I have heard God clearer than I've ever heard him in this season that we're in right now. I began to hear him clearer than I've ever heard him starting in August, September of last year. And here we are in September of this year. And I promise you, this year has been a season of hearing for me. And I know it is only because God is having me to walk out the type season we are in. This is a season of hearing. This is a season, the season of the pandemic is a season to hear. If you've never heard from God, if you've not heard from God in years, or if you, feel that you can't hear from God or God does not speak, well, I can say to you, you are in a period of hearing. You will hear if you set yourself to hear. You will hear. If you quiet down yourself and go with the flow of this season, you will hear. This is a season to hear. This is a season where people will be heard. People will be heard. Not only is this a season for us to hear from God, but this is a season for us to hear from each other. This is a season where people will hear what other people are saying. People will be heard in their complaints. Now, how did I know that the month of June was going to come up with this George Floyd death, and how now blacks are being heard when they talk about the systemic racism, when they talk about the police violence, when they talk about all these injustices and inconsistencies in how things are rationed out and how blacks are seen? Why is it that now so many people of other races, especially the white race, that they're now coming out, that they're now joining hands with us, and they're taking hits upside the head with the batons, and they're being busted in the chest and in the arm and knocked on the ground and foot put on them and whatever else? Why is it now? Because this is a season where people will be heard. The voices of the silenced will be heard in this season. Do you know how many races were silenced? How many ethnicities, ethnic groups were silenced? How many gender groups were silent or silenced by the majority, silenced by the authorities, silenced by those in the positions of power? Well, this is a season where the voices of the silenced will be heard in this season. People who have not been heard will be heard. Now, this is what God was saying to me. How did I know that God was speaking? How would I have known that all of this civil unrest would come about? I couldn't have. This wasn't a period of that. This was supposed to be a period where there was a pandemic out here, a virus out there, COVID-19 out here wreaking havoc on whoever it seemed to find a victim. I would tell people, any knock I get at the door, I just yell out, "I ain't here, Cora." They next door. I don't even live here no more, Cora. You just go on to the next door. It's not us. It's not us. I'm not opening that door. That virus seemed to be going after everyone that it could, any victim that it could find. Well, I was making sure that we weren't going to become a victim. But I never knew that this season was going to include all of this other stuff. I'm in the month of March right here. I didn't know that the month of June and July and August and September and all of these months were going to come. I did not know that. I mean, I knew those months would come, but I didn't know the substance or the events of those months. I didn't see that coming in the least bit. So the voices of the silence in this season will be heard, and people who have not been heard will be heard, and people who have not been called upon will be called upon. People will begin to be called upon who were never called upon, and this is the type season this is. We'll get in that a little later, most likely. This is a quiet season. You know, I think that's what scares people about this season, that the fact that God said that this is a quiet season. Yes, this is a season of much noise because you got a lot of stuff going on. You got a lot of protests going on. You got a lot of groups, hate groups yelling back and forth and whatever else. And, you know, a lot of shooting going on and a lot of politics going on. You got a lot of that going on, a lot of, you know, whatever going on. This is a quiet season. But yet at the same time, God said this is a speaking season. What scares people is the fact of how silent the season is. So many days in the last 6-7 months, it's been so silent outside, it scares you almost. You just know that something is coming down the pipe. Something is coming about. There's a reason for this silence. God said, yes, this is a silent season, and people don't like the fact that it's silent. I've come to learn that people love hell. People love disturbance. People love noise. And if noise isn't happening, people get afraid. This is a quiet season, but at the same time, God said this is a speaking season. This is a speaking and a seeking season. This is a season where people are to speak and people are speaking. And yet at the same time, this is a season where people are to be seeking. This is a seeking season, a season where we seek out truth, where we seek out honesty, where we seek out justice, a season where we seek out the heart of God in the essence of God, the nuggets of God. This is a season where people will seek me. People will seek words from me during this season. They will seek words that are relevant to this season. God said, people will speak words that are relevant to this season. Perhaps that is why you're listening to these recordings, because you're wanting words that are relevant to the season that you're in. You're wanting words that are relative to your present situation, to your current status. This is a season where words of relevance will be important. This is not the season of wealth and prosperity. Now, let me tell you, there are still messages out there going forth about wealth and prosperity. And there is a motivation behind this wealth and prosperity. And I see this here, especially in this season. And God, I want to be steered right in saying this. I want to say this rightly. I want to say this appropriately, because some of this stuff you can't even go and test. You just see it and you know the roots of it. But God was the one who told me this part, and I'm gonna go into this part right here. Not fully, but to an extent. This is not a season of wealth and prosperity. The message of wealth and prosperity is something that people are seeking in this season. Why? First of all, that they knew that people were getting unemployment checks. They were getting bonus money in those unemployment checks. They were getting the stimulus checks, and folk in ministry throughout were trying to hit you for your last bit of money on these last rounds of money that's coming around. And they called themselves saying, treat me like the widow treated the prophet. Give me your last and watch God do you. My thing is this: why won't the prophets give their last, and then we all sit with the goods and the wealth that they have from us already, and then let's all sit and watch them. Let's all sit and watch you preachers and you prophets, you pastors, you apostles, you bishops. Let us all sit and watch you and watch you live off of your faith until God does it for you. Why don't you give us what you have, sell all that you have, and follow Christ as we follow what Christ does with you? How about we switch that around? God said this is not a season of wealth and prosperity, but yet and still I keep hearing people saying, give, 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 give. You don't even have an overhead like you once had, because you're not paying the light bills that you once paid. You're not paying the water bills that you once paid. Why? Because the church houses, for the most part, are shut down. So where is all this coming from? You're not paying people. You laid people off. What are you doing? Why? Anyway. This is not a season of wealth and prosperity. This is not the season for people's personal gain. This is a season of personal loss. Now, does that mean that no one will be able to prosper during this season? No, not really, because if you make mass, apparently this is going to be a time where you're going to make money. If you are into doing shopping for people, you may very well, if you are a procurer, someone who procures, someone who goes out and finds stuff for people and you order it for them, and then you charge them an upcharge for your services, yeah, you're going to make it because people can't find things that they need and they don't know how to search, or they don't want to take the time to search. So there are people who are going to benefit from this here. If you are a restaurant with a drive-through, you're definitely making money like you've never made before. That doesn't mean anything because we don't know how all of that will end. But what I will say is this here: just because certain people will have gain in this season doesn't mean that there's gain across the board in this season. This is not that type of season. This is a season of personal loss. Time and season for everything, but for some reason, in order to keep our message of wealth and prosperity afloat, we don't want to apply time and season for this type season in our wealth and prosperity message. But anyway, this is a season of personal loss. People's personal gains will be lost in this season. Your personal gains will be lost in this season. Many people, not all, but many people's personal wealth will be lost in this season. Personal wealth will be lost in this season. God protects my stuff, and the devourers rebuke, and the cankerworms and all this other thing, and I pay my tithes and my offering. Yep. And you know what? You done drank the Kool-Aid too. And that's kind of messed up. Jim Jones taught you that. That's kind of monked up. People's personal standing will be lost in this season. People's personal wealth, people's personal gain, people's personal standing will be lost in this season. People's political standing will be lost in this season. That's an important one there. People's political standing will be lost in this season. I have a topic here, a topic that's coming up in regards to the United States, the president, and the political system. You'll want to hear that one. Definitely, most definitely. People's political standing will be lost in this season. Your status in the political arena will be lost. This is a period of great discernment, a period of great discernment. Let me tell you, I cannot express to you how greatly my discernment has increased in this season of the pandemic. It is amazing to me, and it has nothing to do with me. When I was wanting to sleep, I could see. When I wasn't trying to put things together, I was putting them together. As I was talking, things were being put together. Things that never registered in my intellect were being put together by me as I would speak to people over the phone, because all of my speakings were over the phone, or have been over the phone for the last 200 days. This is a period of great discernment. This is people's discernibility will be sharpened. People's discernibility will be sharpened. People will begin to discern things as never before. People will begin to discern things as never before. You will begin to discover and see things as you've never seen them before. Things that you never even thought to discern or attempt to discern or discover. It will just be uncovered to you in the moments that you're in. You're just living. But that's where we are. Things are just unfolding before us like never before. I'm telling you. Now, some of you may understand what I'm talking about because you're experiencing it, and you probably didn't even know you were discerning it. But to discern means to perceive with the eyes, to recognize or understand as being distinct or different, to distinguish, to see or notice something that is far away or not very clear or obvious, to understand something that is not immediately obvious. To discern is to be able to tell the difference between two or more things, to be able to detect or distinguish, to be able to recognize or perceive clearly, to perceive by the sight or other sense or by the intellect. For us is more spiritual, to notice or to realize. Discernment is about the act or process of exhibiting keen insight and good judgment. That's what's going to happen in this time period. We're going to gain a keen insight, and we're going to begin to make good judgments on who we make our pastors, or not so much who we make our pastors, but at the same time on who we make our pastors, who we allow ourselves to be associated with, who we connect ourselves with, who we share our proceeds with, who we share our goods and our resources with. We're going to be able to make proper judgments. We're not going to be taken with the okie doke as much as we once were, if at all, after this season works on us. To discern, or discernment, is discrimination. We'll be able to discriminate correctly. There's correct discrimination. Keenness of insight and judgment. Discernment is keen perception or judgment. I cannot tell you how keen my perception is now. There's something about this season that I'm learning, and this is the first time that I'm speaking what I'm saying right now out. I've not spoken this stuff out right here. So even as I'm reading it, I'm realizing how exact and true this is, even in my life. God said to me, the last thing he said to me on March 22nd. Now remember, this is not the whole of what he said to me on March 22nd, but because I'm breaking these down in topics, and the topic of this one is the type of season that we're in, I'm only covering on the days that he spoke with me. I'm only pulling out the type season this is straight from what he said to me. The last thing that he said to me on March 22nd, he said, this is an important season. The type season we're in is an important season. You don't need to be living like this is any other time period. You don't need to be living like this is just any other day on the block. You don't need to be living like this is just, this is time out to just kick back and burp and whatever else you want to do, and just kick the breeze. That is not what this is about. This is a time period. For the last 6 months, we were in a time period where we were supposed to be storing up for ourselves, storing up within us, storing up with God, storing up what we're going to need in order to go into the next cycle. The month of September started a new period within this season, and the months leading up to September were to get us prepared for what we're getting ready to go into. These were not kickback periods. This was not a kickback time. This is an important season. It is not a time to kick back, but it's a time to store up. This is a serious season. Not only is it an important season, but God said this is a serious season. This is no joke. This is no play toy. This virus is no joke. This pandemic season is no joke. This season is like metaphoric. It's even, I believe it'll even turn out to be allegorical. Yet at the same time, it's literal. This is a literal season. There'll be some allegories within this. There'll be some metaphors within this season. There'll be a bunch of literalness in it, because even when you look at the 200,000 lives that are dead within the United States alone, not including the million in the world, the million plus in the world, when you look at how many people it infected, all the millions that it has infected within the United States and the world, this is a serious season, my people. God said, know the season. That's why I'm giving you the type seasons this is. And we must continue on throughout this until we go through all of the different types of season this is. Know the season. Acknowledge the season. Respect the season. Embrace the season. Do not ignore the season. Remember the season. And remember the season that you're in. That's what God was saying to me. You have to acknowledge it, and then you're going to have to respect it. And then you're going to have to embrace it. And you can't ignore it. We're doing our best to ignore this season. This is a season to not be ignored. This is an important and serious season. We are to know this season, not to ignore this season. And then we're to remember the type season we're in. We're to live in a conscious manner regarding this season, and not try to lose ourselves in trying to do the things that we were doing, the underhanded, deceptive things that we were doing prior to this season. You're only setting yourself up for pain and hurt and failure in the future. So that was the end of what God said to me on March 22nd on the type season that we're in. But then we move over into March 24th. And this is what God said to me. Do not think, this is March 24th now. Do not think that this is a season of plenty. This is not going to be a season of plenty for most. This is not a season of wealth, but rather this is a season of loss. And somehow we keep thinking, all you have to do is look at the overtone of this season. Do you know how many people have lost sound health in this season? Do you know how many people have lost sound wealth in this season? Do you know how many people have lost family members in this season? So how do you somehow come to think that this is not a season of loss? Of course, this is a season of loss. Do you know how many people have lost their jobs? Do you know how many people have lost where they live? This is a season of loss. This is a season of famine. This is a season of famine. This is a season of famine for the wealthy, a season of famine for the wealthy. This is a season where wealthy people will experience famine. They'll experience a lack, a shortage therein. Don't limit it to any one particular area. The wealthy, many preachers, many churches are wealthy. This is a season of famine for the wealthy. And what do wealthy people do when they experience a famine? Now, they really don't know what a famine is because they don't really experience it like that. Even if they grew up in it, they've lost touch with that reality in all of their greed and wealth today. But the season of famine for the wealthy would not be equal to what our season of famine is. But then we would never be as broke as they are going to be. Why? We never had as much as they had. And we know how to stay afloat with almost nothing. They don't. Famine for them is when they lose $1 million. They feel like they have no more money, even though they have 10 million in the bank still. Drawing crazy interest. This is a season of famine for the wealthy. This is a season of famine for the well-to-do. This is a season for the wealthy to be brought to their knees. This is a season for the wealthy to be brought to their knees. Remember this. This is a season for the wealthy to be brought to their knees. Does this mean that every wealthy person will be brought to their knees? No. You have people like Tyler Perry, and not because he's black, but you have people like Tyler Perry who's doing good with his money. He's always helping families and helping people. You have other people who are really pouring into people. You have people like LeBron James who's pouring into people. You have other people who are pouring into people. Those people there, and people who aren't even doing what they're doing, there's going to be people who aren't going to experience famine in their wealth simply because of whatever. However, there will be famine in other areas of their lives, just like there will be in areas of our lives. This is a season for the wealthy to be brought to their knees. People will be crushed over what is occurring during this season. So this is a season of crushing. This is a season where people will be crushed over what is occurring during this season. Girl, don't let that bother you. Don't let that take you. Don't let that disturb you. What are you talking about? This season was designed for certain people to be crushed during this season. Their situations are not going to be better. Everybody's situation is not going to be better. So we need to stop selling these bad wolf tickets or these bad fake nickels, to people as though they're going to be able to cash this stuff in and get rich off of it. No, that is not what type season this is. Now, again, in the book of Jeremiah, it talks about they come and they give you these promising messages of wealth and prosperity and peace. And when God is saying there is no wealth, no prosperity, or no peace, at least not in this season, not in this period in history, not in this period of your destiny, not for every person. Now, some people will walk into a greater wealth due to this destiny. Many people will eventually ultimately walk in a greater sense of wealth, a greater literalness of wealth in and during this season. But don't think that is the norm of this season. That is not what this season is about. This is not a season about health just blowing above and beyond, and that it has where it has ever been. This is a season where people are going to be sick and people are going to die. Many are going to die. It's going to blow your mind how many people are going to die. You have not seen the beginning driplets of this thing yet. This is a season for the wealthy to be brought to their knees, and people will be crushed over what is occurring during this season. Their situations are not going to get better. Their situations are not going to get better. God told me that twice. That means something. Now check this out. I know that we have these messages saying that people's situations, your situation is going to get better, and it's going to get better, and it's going to get better. And then if it doesn't get better, they say because you didn't believe by faith and you didn't mix what you heard when I told you what God said by faith, and because you didn't mix it by faith, you lost your blessing. Man, get out of here. Their situations are not going to get better. Some people's situations are not going to get better. So you can tell them you can tell them all you want, preachers, about sowing this and sowing this so that your situation can get better. There's no magic wand to this. That isn't even operating in principle. That's operating truly in trickery. If that's more in trickery than it is in principle. Now, because people's hearts were right when they were doing what they were doing, then things may come out of that, but not because of why you did it. Your motive and your intent wasn't for people as much as you want to believe or say in order to justify yourself for begging these people for how you're begging them in these time periods of famine. This is what God is coming to address in this season. So let's just keep going. Let's see how we get on this here. Okay, now this is not what that is not what this is going to be. A season where things is just going to get better and it's just going to get better and better. That is not what this is for. Remember, there's a time to plant and then there's a time to uproot. There's a time really to prosper and then there's a time to suffer loss. Somehow we don't add that into whatever, because you know why? That won't sell in the prosperity message. With the prosperity message, that type message will not sell to the people. People will not give if you tell them the whole truth about their giving. You don't know what seed. Well, that's why the Bible talks about plant a seed here, plant a seed there. You don't know which one will. Well, planting a seed is not always about money. And then you say, well, your heart is connected where your money is, your heart is, and whatever. And we try to do all of these little trickery games and whatever, and all of these old religious tricks. But remember, God said we're moving into a new season. We're in a shifting. And in that shifting, a lot of that mess is going to go out the window. Now, if you're practicing that, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just talking it. When you have your mic, you talk what you want to talk. This is my mic. I paid for this mic, this physical mic. I paid for it. Not only did I pay for this mic, I'm paying the price to talk on this mic in my life, because there's a price that you pay in talking on this mic. And I'm not trying to charge that to anybody else. And that was not for me to get to a certain point and then begin to charge people to hear what God is saying in this season. The wealthy will be brought low during this season. Do not think that this is a season of plenty. There is not going to be plenty for most during this season. That is not what this season is, but rather, again, this is a season of what? Loss. Okay. Famine. A lack for many. The wealthy will begin to faint during this season. The wealthy will begin to faint. They will begin to lose heart. They will begin to hurt like they have never hurt before. Fainting, will some commit suicide? I'm not sure, but God did say something of that effect to me at one point. People are going to lose their wealth during this season. They're going to lose their businesses. Many businesses will be lost due to this season. Now, remember, of course, a lot of people see this now, okay, because we're now how many months into this here. But when God gave this to me in March, on March 24th, we were just understanding how this thing really would kill somebody. We didn't understand. I don't even know if we were shut down then. I don't even know when we even shut down. So even though I'm telling you this here to tell you what the type season this is, yet at the same time, you have to understand that I did not know what we now know now. So this gives you an edge over me in the sense that you can compare what I'm reading to you that God said to me on March 24th. You can just think back and into your memory bank and realize you've already seen that on the news or in the newspaper or whatever. The wealthy will begin to faint during this season. They'll lose heart. They will begin to hurt like they've never hurt before. People are going to lose their wealth. They're going to lose their businesses. Many businesses will be lost during this season. Now, I understand that it's 1 hour and 3 minutes into this recording, and I need to wrap it up, but I'm going to try to get to the end of March 24th. Before I wrap it up, I only have 2 more to go right here, and then we'll go into the next recording and pick up on the type season this is. This will be a time like no other. So what type season is it? A time like no other. There will be nothing to compare the time that you are in, the season that you're in right now. God said there will be nothing to compare this season with. This will be a time like no other. So do not listen to the people. This is what God said to me. Do not listen to the people. Do not listen to the words of the people who say differently. Do not believe them. Anybody tell you that it's something different? If anybody tells me that this is something different than what God has stated to me, in that this is a time period, this season that we're in is a time period like no other, and that nothing will be compared to this time season that we're in, if anyone comes to me and says any different, I say phooey on you. I think phooey was something that the Little Rascals would use. Phooey. Most people will suffer during this season. This is what God said to me. What type suffering? Well, a lot, trust me. I'll get to some of that. Most people will suffer during this season. Most people will lose much during this season. Most people will lose most during this season. This will be a period of great loss. This will be a period where loss will be the norm. Not the exception, but the norm. So all of this prosperity mess right now, noise. In fact, if you just think about it, unless we lose some things, we'll never have space to gain anything new. Why? Because old wineskin can't hold new wine. You got to get rid of the old wineskin in order to take in new wine. Unless we lose, which will be the norm of this season, we're not going to be able to gain anything. But people cannot see that because we are so stuck in us. We are so stuck in what we want and what we think God and whatever else, however you want to put it. Anyway, I'll read one other thing since I'm right here at the end. On March 27th. Now, I just left, I think, March 24th. Now, I have one thing that God stated to me about the season, and it is March 27th. The one thing he said to me in regards to the in the type season, in reference to the type season this is, he said, this is the season of the undercurrent. This is the season of the undercurrent. God says there's an undercurrent going on. You know, you have a current and then you have an undercurrent. There's a current that is up under the water, beneath the surface of the water, and it's pulling us in a direction. He said, this is the season of the undercurrent. There is an undercurrent going on during this season, and the undercurrent that is going on in this season will force you to flow with it. That undercurrent pulls you, and it causes you to flow with it. If you fight against the undercurrent in a natural undercurrent in the ocean, being from South Florida, I know if you fight the undercurrent, you will more than likely end up drowning, or you will be taken so far out to sea that you won't be able to get back. It'll drift you straight out there. You do not fight with the undercurrent. You go with it. God said the undercurrent of this season will take you with the flow. The undercurrent of the flow during this season will take you with the shift, but you don't fight for it. But just know that this is the season of the undercurrent. I have a definition for all of that, but I'm not going to pull that definition now. You just look up the word undercurrent and you will see it for yourself what it means, because the revelation of what the importance of the undercurrent is within the definition of the undercurrent. You go pick that out. Do a little research on the undercurrent, and then do research on the type of currents there are that occur in the ocean. Well, this is the season of the undercurrent, and that undercurrent is taking us right in the direction of the shift. That undercurrent has a flow in it that will take us right with the shifting of this season. Okay, we're going to end this one. We're going to prepare for the next one. We're going to continue on with the very same thing that we left off. The very same topic, which is the pandemic season. The topic of the message itself is the divine season of the pandemic. And within the topic is the subtopic, which is the type of season this is. We'll pick up from there. Thank you for listening. Please continue to listen.